It was exactly 6:47 in the morning on the 18th of December, 1944, amidst the biting, unforgiving cold of the Belgian winter, when Staff Sergeant Thomas McKinley was forced to witness the death of his best friend, a tragedy that unfolded not because of a tactical error or a failure of courage, but for a reason so mechanically trivial and infuriatingly preventable that it would haunt him for the rest of his days, occurring as Corporal Eddie Martinez, a 22-year-old native of El Paso with dreams of opening his own auto repair shop, crouched behind a frost-covered stone wall outside the village of Rocherath, engaging German infantry from the elite 12th SS Panzer Division, who were advancing through the dense morning fog at a range of 300 yards. Eddie shouldered his M1 Garand, the standard-issue service rifle, and fired with rhythmic precision 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 shots, until the inevitable mechanical conclusion of the sequence arrived with a sharp metallic ping sound, the distinct acoustic signature of the empty N-block clip ejecting from the rifle's receiver, a noise that rang out across the frozen field like a dinner bell in a quiet house, signaling to every German soldier within 400 yards that the American was now completely defenseless for the next 4 seconds while he fumbled to reload. In those critical seconds, Eddie's hands, stiff and clumsy from the sub-zero temperatures, struggled to shove a fresh clip into the receiver, and just as he managed to grasp the ammunition, a single shot from a German Mauser cracked through the cold air, striking him and sending him falling forward with a neat fatal hole through his neck, his fresh ammunition clip still clutched tight in his frozen hand, while McKinley, watching helplessly from his own foxhole just 30 yards away, realized with a sickening clarity that his friend had survived the scorching heat of North Africa, the brutal invasion of Sicily, and the hedgerows of Normandy, only to die now because his own weapon had effectively announced to the enemy exactly when to kill him. As McKinley looked down at his own M1 Garand, a weapon praised by General George S. Patton as the greatest battle implement ever devised, he felt a surge of cold fury because he knew that this rifle, the very tool supposed to win the war, had just murdered his best friend, a realization that would drive him over the next 48 hours to utilize a modification he had secretly built 3 weeks prior, a modification that was explicitly court-martial level illegal to kill 95 German soldiers and single-handedly hold a critical road junction against an entire SS Panzer company. This forbidden invention, born from grief and mechanical intuition, would eventually spread through the 2nd Infantry Division like a benevolent virus, dropping American casualty rates by a staggering 31% and saving an estimated 840 lives, yet it would never appear in a single official Army report, leaving the US military to spend 6 weeks debating whether to award McKinley a medal for his genius or throw him in a military prison for destroying government property. This is the untold story of how one unassuming factory worker from the industrial heartland of Indiana fixed the US Army's most lethal design flaw, using scavenged parts from a destroyed Jeep, 4 hours of illicit labor in a freezing barn, and the absolute, unshakable certainty that watching one more friend die during a reload was a fate far worse than any punishment the Army could ever devise. To understand the solution, one must understand the man, for Thomas McKinley was a product of Gary, Indiana, a city where the night sky perpetually glowed orange from the blast furnaces of US Steel, and where he had spent his youth watching his father pour molten iron during grueling 12-hour shifts, spending his own summers in the maintenance shop, learning to diagnose failing heavy machinery by sound alone, earning the nickname Ears McKinley from his foreman because he could identify a grinding bearing, a slipping belt, or a stress fracture in metal, long before the engineer's instruments could detect a problem, developing a sensitivity to mechanical rhythm and an obsession with finding the single point of failure in a system that would prove to be more valuable in the forests of Belgium than any amount of formal military training. When the draft came in 1943, placing him in the 23rd Infantry Regiment of the 2nd Infantry Division, McKinley became a rifleman who couldn't stop analyzing the M1 Garand, realizing that while the rifle was brilliant in its semi-automatic, gas-operated design that gave American infantry a massive volume of fire advantage over the German bolt-action rifles, it possessed a fatal flaw that by December 1944 had killed 14 men in his company, not because the rifle failed to work, but because it worked exactly as designed, creating a predictable rhythm of fire, followed by a mandatory audible pause. He had seen Private James Donovan die on December 3rd near the Roa River when a German machine gunner, who had been counting Donovan's shots, put a 3-round burst through his chest during the reload gap. He had seen Corporal Willie Bass die on December 8th when German infantry rushed his position the moment they heard the ping, and he had seen Lieutenant Wesley Hughes die on December 11th while trying to teach his men to stagger their reloads, a tactic that failed when SS troops suppressed the covering positions to exploit the reload gaps of the others. By mid-December, the 23rd Infantry had suffered a 34% casualty rate, and while officers blamed poor training or German tactical superiority, McKinley blamed the mathematics of the 8-round clip, which dictated one catastrophic reload gap every 30 seconds of sustained fire, creating a predictability that equaled death. The catalyst for his rebellion came on December 12th, just 3 days before the Battle of the Bulge would explode across the Ardennes, when he and Eddie Martinez were sharing a foxhole, eating cold K-rations and talking about the future, with Eddie dreaming of buying Pete's Auto Repair on Alamo Street, only to confess a recurring nightmare where he was trapped behind cover, firing his 8 rounds, hearing the ping, and then watching helplessly as a German gunner traversed toward him, while his hands refused to reload, a fear that McKinley tried to dismiss, but knew was statistically valid, a fear that became reality 6 days later when the ping killed Eddie exactly as he had dreamed. Driven by this loss, and the impending German assault on the critical road junction outside Roqueirath, McKinley decided to use the device he had created in secret on the night of November 27th, after his proposal to Captain Herricks to modify the magazines was rejected, with a stern reminder that they used Army-issue equipment as designed. Ignoring the threat of a dishonorable discharge and prison time, McKinley had worked by flashlight in a barn outside Krinkelt, hands shaking from the cold, to execute a plan that was simple in concept but complex in execution. Create a detachable external magazine that mounted to the side of the receiver to feed additional rounds after the standard clip was exhausted, thereby increasing capacity to 14 rounds and, more importantly, making the reload timing completely unpredictable to the enemy. He had scavenged a spring from a damaged BAR magazine, a catch mechanism from a destroyed M1 carbine, and sheet metal from a shot-up Jeep door, working until 4 in the morning to manufacture a magazine housing and calibrate the feed lips to precise angles, testing the spring tension 43 times, until his thumb bled to ensure it wouldn't jam the action, finally achieving a prototype that fired 84 test rounds with 0 malfunctions, feeding the standard 8 rounds followed smoothly by 6 rounds from the external magazine, allowing for continuous fire, where doctrine said there should be a vulnerable pause. When the German assault began at 6:47 a.m. on December 18th, starting with screaming artillery shells, and followed by a thick grey fog that cut visibility to 50 yards, McKinley was ready, watching as shapes moved through the mist, and realizing this was not a probe, but a full company assault by SS Panzer Grenadiers, veteran troops who smoked with the confidence of men who had fought on the Eastern Front. With his squad down to 7 men, and orders to hold for 3 hours until reinforcements arrived, McKinley faced impossible odds, but he had his modified rifle loaded with 14 rounds, giving him an advantage the Germans could not anticipate. As the first patrol element of 12 Germans appeared at 150 yards, McKinley fired with disciplined aim, dropping the first 2 and wounding a third, expending 5 rounds, then firing his remaining 3 standard rounds as the enemy returned fire, the empty clip ejected with its telltale ping, signaling the 4 seconds of vulnerability that every German ear was trained to hear. But instead of pausing to reload, McKinley kept firing 9, 10, 11, shocking the advancing Germans who froze in confusion as the American rifle, which should have been silent, continued to lethally engage them, allowing McKinley to fire rounds 12, 13, and 14 to break the patrol's momentum, before he finally reloaded both systems in a mere 6 seconds. As the main assault wave of at least 80 men supported by MG-42 machine guns hit them, McKinley transformed from a man into a machine, using the fog and his unpredictable fire to systematically dismantle the German attack, dropping targets with precision shots, taking out NCOs trying to rally their troops, and silencing machine gun crews, all while maintaining a rhythm that defied German doctrine. When the Germans counted to 8 and surged forward expecting a reload, he cut them down with rounds 9 through 14. When they tried to use smoke and flanking maneuvers, he adapted, his continuous fire breaking their tactical timing and creating hesitation where there should have been aggression. By 8:15 a.m., the first wave withdrew, leaving bodies scattered in textbook fields of fire, but they returned at 10:30 a.m. with 50 men supported by 2 Stug 3rd assault guns, heavily armored vehicles that could have obliterated McKinley's position had they not stopped at 800 yards to wait for infantry screening, a tactical choice that allowed McKinley to engage the unprotected infantry with another 380 rounds of fire over a 3-hour engagement. His rifle barrel grew so hot that heat shimmer rose from the metal, forcing him to pour canteen water over it to cool it down, yet he kept firing, his position holding firm even as his squad ran low on ammunition and suffered wounds, until finally at 2:40 p.m., American artillery support arrived to break the German assault, securing the junction. When relief forces arrived at 4:20 p.m., they found 95 confirmed German KIA directly attributed to McKinley's position, a feat so impossible that the battalion intelligence officer, Captain Morrison, stared at the modified rifle and simply asked how long it would take to make 50 more. McKinley was immediately pulled off the line and set up in a field workshop in Elsenborn with verbal orders to reproduce the modification, leading to the manufacture of 47 units by December 23 and 340 by January 2, the invention spreading entirely by word of mouth from platoon to platoon, as soldiers realized the survival advantage it offered. The Germans were the first to officially notice, with captured officers complaining during interrogations, that Americans no longer reloaded on a predictable schedule, throwing off their assault timing, and by late January, Wehrmacht tactical schools were teaching soldiers to avoid assumptions about American rifle capacity. The statistical impact was undeniable. Prior to the modification, the 2nd Infantry Division suffered a 34% casualty rate during offensive operations, but after widespread adoption, that number dropped to 23%, with defensive casualty rates falling from 23% to 14%, saving an estimated 3,000 lives across multiple divisions as the modification spread through lateral information sharing. Despite a favorable report from Captain Theodore Hartmann of Army Ordnance in March 1945, which recommended official adoption, the bureaucracy of the Army paralyzed the decision-making process until the war ended, resulting in the eventual destruction of the modified assemblies during post-war inspections and the classification of the device as a non-standard unauthorized modification. Thomas McKinley returned to Gary, Indiana, resuming his life at U.S. Steel, never seeking credit, never speaking of the Battle of the Bulge, and burying the story until a historian named Dr. Robert Stein tracked him down in 1964 to ask about the anomalous casualty statistics, to whom McKinley simply explained that he hadn't done it for fame, but because Eddie was 22 and died trying to reload. McKinley passed away in 1992, his obituary mentioning his service, but omitting the innovation that had changed the course of battles, leaving only a single modified rifle hidden in his basement, which now sits in the Indiana Military Museum, misunderstood by visitors who pass it every day. It stands as a silent testament to the reality that true military innovation is rarely the product of committees or procurement offices, but rather the desperate, brilliant work of sergeants and mechanics who, when faced with the unbearable moral weight of watching their friends die due to a mechanical flaw, choose to break the rules to rewrite the odds, understanding that the only recognition that truly matters is the quiet realization that a squad made it home because a machine worked when it absolutely had to.